Cool. All right. On questions, probably best at the end. But I mean, if there's something that you really need to know right now, jump in. That's totally fine. So yeah, it's being recorded, so absolutely no pressure here. Also being the first talk of the Revive Meetup, but hopefully it'll go okay. So yeah, first of all about me, I'm Ryan. I've been working in Edinburgh for about 7 or so years in mobile now. Worked at Kotakan at first. It was an app agency working on things like Skyscanner, some other apps. And then since then I've been delving into the startup world, first with a company called Yavi, which was a kind of chat app for helping shift workers kind of organize everything, organize their life, organize their work. And then moving on from that, I'm now the lead developer at Flick, which we'll see a little bit more about in a minute. But basically it's a kind of chat app to kind of bring fans together to talk online about things they're interested in. Bring them together with influencers that they kind of follow on other things like Instagram and have a more kind of personal connection and share interests there. So you'll see a little bit more about that in a bit. But yeah, I'm going to talk about architectures today in the app world. So I always think it's kind of, when you talk about app architectures, it's called architecture for a reason. I've always kind of thought about it in the sense of kind of buildings. Everything's a little bit pink because of the adapter, so just imagine this is white. The designer at Flick's going to freak out when he sees this and it's pink. He's not going to like it. But anyway, so you're looking at a building and you're like, okay, made one room and you need water. We've got maybe a sink in there. Let's just put water in this top corner because we need it right there. Then you go on, you build another room, and then you need some gas in there. It's a kitchen. You've got a hob, and then you think, actually, we need something over there in this next room. But luckily, I've got water in that first room, so I'll just kind of pipe that across. That's fine. Get water over there. It's pretty nice and simple. And you have another room, and you need water as well. But it's down in this corner. And you're like, okay, I'll stick it down there. That's also kind of fine. And then you also find that you actually need gas in this next room. You kind of snake that over there, and it's kind of fine. But then if you keep on like that, this mouse is. You end up with something horrifying like this, which is a picture of some fish tanks with a million pipes and cables and everything like that. I don't really understand how you would end up in this situation because you can't see the fish, or you've kind of lost the point at this point. I don't know what they were doing, but if you just kind of let everything go wherever it will as you build things, then you end up in a complete mess. So you definitely need to think about things before you go. So why do we need an architecture? Obviously to avoid that situation, but okay, I think I'm just going to have to go with this. Separation of concerns. That's a really important thing with architecture. If you just do whatever you want, you can end up with just everything in one place, which can make it really difficult to know what should be where, why it should be there. You've just got a bundle of stuff. You don't really know what's going on. But if you separate out into a clean place, you know where different pieces of logic or different pieces of code should be. Makes it easy to test. Everything being separate, you can know which things are important to test, which things are easy to test. Especially in mobile, it's really good to be able to separate your kind of Android and iOS code out from your just Swift and Kotlin or Java code. Makes that easier to test. Really important thing is consistency across the project, especially as the teams grow. You get lots of engineers working on something. You want to know that even if you haven't worked on that screen before, it's the same as another screen. You go in there and you know where you're gonna find different things. You're gonna find certain things in certain files, and you kind of know immediately where you are without it being completely different all the way across the app. Enforces good practice. Because you know you've got this architecture, you know you've got to do this. You've got to use good engineering practice because it's built into the architecture. You know that if you're putting logic in your kind of Android bit, you've done something wrong there. And instead of, that really helps when you've got a range of experience on your team. You know, your most experienced engineer might think, oh, I'll never do that. But somebody new to the project or somebody that's kind of more junior may not always do the right thing. So it helps giving them a kind of structure they can kind of learn from and learn good engineering practice through that structure. Another element is kind of communication, sharing best practice externally. Like design patterns in any kind of coding thing, it's a kind of shared vocabulary that if I have an app architecture and say, oh, it's kind of like an MVP architecture, but then anyone who's done anything with MVP before, or you see a blog post about it, you kind of know that you're talking about the same kind of thing, rather than just some good engineering practices, but it's completely amorphous and different. So what is the best architecture? Is there such a thing? There isn't such a thing. So there are many different architectures that kind of come around at different points, seem to go through waves, different technologies and different platforms and things have different ones that become really prevalent. MVC, MVP, MVVM, lots of M's. Other ones, Redux, Viper, MVI, clean architectures. Loads of different things come along, they come through and they're the new in thing, lots of blog posts saying this is the coolest thing. There isn't really a best one. They can be good and bad. There's definitely bad ways to do architecture and there's bad things, but I think the important thing is to think about why you're choosing an architecture and what it's giving you. So some things to think about when you're choosing an architecture for an app. What platforms are you building for? Do you have a very cross-platform thing that you want the most shared logic as possible in something, either in shared language or in shared thing? Then that's going to be really important for the architecture you build. Also how those frameworks work and how you have to access stuff, like in the Android or iOS world. Sort of extending from that, frameworks and patterns you're using. Do you use any, or do you want to use anything like if you've got a cloud database or you're using RxJava or you're using something that's important to the way you want to build something that is going to have a big impact on the architecture, because you want to pair it with an architecture that fits well with it. Otherwise, you're losing a lot of the advantages of that thing you're trying to use. How complex the thing's going to get. There's a variety of apps. There's a lot of apps that are kind of do a network request, display it in a list. Then there are a lot of apps that do more complicated things and might be a bit of a variety. So you need to know as much as possible how complex are things going to get. What do you need to be able to cope with? That can change a lot. How easy is it to make changes? Is it kind of flexible? Is it very different from other things? Can you kind of migrate it more slowly if you need to? And the final thing, like how many files do you need to create to make a simple feature? Always a good thing to think about. You can definitely get some architectures that are really cool, really work, but you want to make a really simple change, you got to like create 6 files. And you need to know that you're going to get a benefit from that. Not just because it's cool, you should go with that. You may need that. It might be a good way of doing it, but you need to know the trade-offs that you're making there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about kind of chat and stuff. So these are 2 screens from the Flick app, but in pink. So this is the on the left here we've got kind of our group screen. So this is a group that's all about Man United. So there's a guy who's got a big following on Instagram. People who are interested in Manchester United like talk about it. He kind of posts things about news and things going on. But this is his Flick group. So he's got just over almost 3,500 people here that come in, and everyone talks about Man United, talk about what's going on. Talk about transfer news and what's going on in the match. They have live chats and stuff like this. So this is our kind of group screen that you can, each of these is basically a different conversation, like a kind of WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger chat, but all with the same people in. So instead of having different people, this is all of those same people can be in all of these chats. So obviously you've got a lot of people in there. WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger max out at 250 people you're allowed to have in. So we're trying to do chat for way more people. It's technically challenging and also challenging from a UI and UX perspective, because you need to make that make sense if lots of people are jumping in and talking lots of stuff. So this is a kind of group screen on the left, and this is a kind of chat screen. It's a bit difficult to make some of the stuff out, but you can kind of see that it has the same kind of things you would get in Messenger or WhatsApp. Groups up messages. You can reply, you can react, you can do all this kind of stuff, pictures, videos, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So quickly going to talk about our general architecture. So this is kind of the architecture we have on the group screen that we had on the left there. It's basically a kind of MVP architecture. I'll just try and run through it quickly. On the left, we've got the Android stuff. So activity, fragment, view, they're all the Android classes. Android code, we want to have no logic in there really. Then we have a presenter. The fragment and activity will call through to that when something's been done, something's been tapped, etc. And then all the kind of logic is there for what's going to be displayed on the screen. It uses use cases or interactors to get the data using RxJava. So it can look at things that are changing and it's listening to that. So any changes are immediately come back in there. So a new conversation's created on that group screen. The presenter's just listening to that. It'll immediately appear in the data there and then just be displayed on the screen. And we've got a range of use cases that can be used for that. And the kind of final step is the service wrappers, which can touch the Android code again. Middle sections are just Kotlin. This one can do things like network requests, access the preferences, anything that kind of touches Android, just a very light wrapper around that, no logic or anything. It's just this is how you access system resources, basically. So that's a kind of basic architecture. It's pretty much just an MVP thing. But things that's kind of okay on a lot of things, but you read a lot of blog posts and you see something and you're like, okay, this is cool. It kind of runs you through a really simple case because it's the easiest way to understand something. You go through a simple case, you can imagine that this is how you do it in that case. But things can kind of get a lot more complicated. So this is, probably a lot of people have seen this, but how to draw a horse. So simple, simple, simple. It's all looking good, very easy. I can do this. And then the final stage is always not really quite that. It's not just do that extra little bit. It's actually can get a lot more complicated than that. And this is definitely something you find if you try and create something like a chat screen. Things get really, really complicated in a way that you don't even notice when you look at something like WhatsApp. So I'm going to try and run through a couple of the stages we got to when we were kind of going through this journey over sort of a couple of years. So this is a kind of chat screen. There's lots of complicated stuff about loading messages and stuff like that, and grouping them up, and what happens when messages come in at different times, because lots of people are sending them asynchronously. They can come in at different times. A message can come in here now, even though, because it's just taken this device a long time to get that message, so you have to rejig everything. Lots of message loading stuff that I won't go into. But after that, so you've got a lot of kind of code in for that in your presenter. Start adding features. You start with the basic stuff. You can chat, you can do things. Okay, right now we want to send some images, we want to view them, maybe we want some files, all these kind of things at the bottom that you want to be able to send. And then you realize that everything's getting quite bloated. You've got 1,000 lines of code in your presenter. Nobody wants 1,000 lines of code in a file. That's definitely a bad sign. So you try and think, well, okay, I'll try and do something about that. I'll maybe create some kind of helpers to isolate some code that don't really have any state. And just here's a bit of code that can be on its own. Pull that out. It's kind of gone from the presenter now, so it kind of masks the problem. It feels like it's a little bit better, but it's not really gone away. Then you're like, okay, I want to do some other stuff. I want to react to that message. Let's add the logic in for that. And then, okay, I've got way too much stuff now. With all that message loading stuff, that's a lot. Let's split the presenter in two. There's two major things going on a screen. There's what's going on with the messages, all these messages, loading them, displaying them, all that kind of stuff. And then there's the other stuff that's on the screen, which is sending message. There's lots of sending kind of stuff going on there. Displaying the toolbar at the top, stuff like that. So you kind of split those into two, kind of manage it to try and make it feel manageable. Don't have 1,000 lines in 1,000 lines of code in a file. But you just keep on going. There's always more user features you need. The product needs to evolve. It needs to keep pace with all of those kind of apps that people are used to, like WhatsApp. So you need to be able to reply to messages. Then you think about, okay, we want to pin messages to the top so the host can leave a message that everyone can see. And you want to expand that. You want to do things like that. You want to tap a user to view a mini profile. You want to see who that person is. Before you know it, you're just putting so much stuff into that. It just becomes more like an app in itself in one screen rather than something that you usually deal with. So it gets to the point where that's just not going to work. So I'm just going to quickly run through one case of basically a simple feature, just to kind of look at what it touches on the screen. So this is a simple case. I've typed a message here at the bottom that I've made a spelling error. I've missed the E off everyone. I feel like an idiot. I think I want to delete this. So I can kind of long tap on that, and it selects it. So it becomes a darker blue. Maybe not that clear on the screen, but this has become a darker blue. I can react to it at that place. I can choose one of those things to react. The thing at the bottom has changed now. I can't type anymore. It tells me to tap and hold any message to add a reaction. I've now also got things appearing at the top. The toolbar's completely changed. I've got actions. I can reply. I can copy. I can delete. So by doing that one action, pretty much all of the parts of the screen have now changed to do different things. So it's not really a case of just separating this out into different components. Everything is shared logic, shared state. Everything is there changing at the same time on one action. It's not a case of, I could maybe split this out into fragments, have a presenter for each of them. They're all independent. On something like this, the state is covering everything, and it's all very complicated. So the next stage, say I want to delete this. I'm going to tap the delete icon. I do that. This changes the message, tells it to delete it. It says, okay, this message was deleted. Everything's kind of reverted back to its previous state, but now with this kind of deleted message. So given that all of that kind of stuff has to happen and it's all shared, then you've got a lot of logic you need to deal with, and it's not really separable. It's not that kind of problem. So we finally got to that stage where it just wasn't sufficient anymore in our kind of MVP architecture. We thought, for this screen, we're going to have to do something different. Now, had it been kind of all across the app, all of our screens were kind of hitting this problem that this architecture just doesn't really work for us, then it might have been a case to actually change that architecture and do something different, maybe evolve it. But for this case, it's very much specific to this screen. We don't want to change everything and make everything really complicated for every screen we do, when it's really just a problem for this screen, which is just fundamentally going to be difficult because it's much more complicated. So what we did is evolve the architecture to be more powerful, but just for this specific screen, while keeping as similar as possible to what we had before, so that you still get that benefit that you kind of know what's going on when you come in there, and it kind of works interoperably. You will still need the use cases that the other screens are going to use, because some of it's shared. You want to use your group information, your user information, etc. So here's kind of a quick rundown of what that kind of looks like. So again, still got the Android stuff on the left, but now instead of one presenter, we've split that into lots of different presenters. So there's a kind of presenter that's covering different sections of the screen, and it's got all that logic in there. Makes it easy to test. They've come down to sort of 80 to 400 lines of code in each of them. Something for sending messages, something for the toolbar, something for reactions, those kind of things. Makes it easy to test them. But as I kind of said before, previously all the state would have been in the presenter, but there's loads of presenters now. So you want the fragment not to also have any logic in, so it doesn't need to know what it wants, who wants to handle things. So it just has one coordinator that it just says, okay, user tapped a message, long tapped a message, and then the coordinator will pass that on to any of the sub-presenters that care. So they'll then get on with it. But as I said about the state, all that state needs to not live in the presenters anymore. So we've just got a chat state class that just has lots of state, no logic, doesn't do anything. It just sits there holding all the state. All of the presenters can access that shared state and make changes where they need to. And then in order to kind of complete the loop, then each of those presenters can call back to the fragment to make changes on the screen. I'm only putting the arrows in from this one presenter. It's obviously all of them, but I just want to make it simple. And then, as before, we've got the same stuff. So each of those has access to the use cases and the service wrappers. So what we've done is really just split out those kind of presenters, give it a common chat state, so that it's capable of keeping everything as separable as possible, being able to still test it. And it's just kind of an evolution of it. It definitely still has problems. The chat state, all of those presenters depend on what the data is in that chat state, and you're testing it. So if any of these presenters is going rogue and doing stuff in other data that shouldn't affect, then that is a problem. So that's definitely something that I still want to address, and I'm looking at different ways we can do that. But that's how we've kind of coped with that. So in summary, kind of what I wanted to say is, obviously, definitely use an app architecture. There's lots of huge benefits of using an app architecture. I think it's more important to use one and you know why than which specific one you're using. So I think it's really important to understand all the pros and cons of an architecture and why you're using it, what it's giving you, where it's going to fall down, and then you kind of keep on going and evaluate that as you're going. So you kind of see, is this working for us? Do we need to kind of modify it in a small way? Do we need to modify it all the way across the app? Or is there just a kind of change that we can make in a part of the app that's going to make it still make sense and give as much of those benefits of having that common pattern all over the app while giving you a bit more flexibility for what you need to do? And that's it. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Sure.
Could you give an example of how have your views of how to structure a project evolved over time?
Sure. So the question was, how have my views of structuring a project evolved over time? I definitely think that working on sort of 2 successive chat applications has made me think a lot more about architecture, because it really forces you to think that you have to do everything so efficiently to cope with the amount of code and amount of logic that's going in. First major app I worked on was the Skyscanner app, had millions of users, but it was fairly early on in the kind of architecture realms. There wasn't really a defined architecture. We didn't have anything like that. There was lots of good engineering practice to try and separate things out, but it was all different in different parts of the app. And it was based on the strong engineers in the team thinking this is a good way of architecting this to keep things separable and testable, keeping some of the logic away from the Android code, but it wasn't the same all over the app. And I think through time, seen a lot more of kind of common architectures all over the app, all through the app, that maybe make it clearer what you should do every time. You go into a different screen and you know where you can get the data from your database, you know where you can change the things on the screen, and it's very consistent. I think the most important thing is to have that kind of consistency all over the place. Basically, I've gone through here where you change one bit of the app and not the other. There should absolutely be the exception. You shouldn't be doing that in like 90% of apps. You shouldn't need to do that. It's only when it gets to that kind of level of really complicated things that I think that really comes to it.
Follow-up question. Is your preference to structure your project by feature or by type of the type of product? Is it integration and state management?
I definitely prefer per feature personally. I think you kind of need a combination. You want everything to be separated in both of those sort of directions, but I'd organize by feature basically, yeah. But you want your code separated file-wise and stuff into both of those things. So you kind of everything is separated, but I'd group them by feature personally. Yeah, sure.
Did you consider at any point to try and create smarter views? So basically create actually custom views with its own presenter that pretty much handles the states rather than splitting into multiple presenters.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think you might have a better case by testing the views independently to make sure they work in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think that however you split this, you'll still rely a lot on integration testing in reality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just too many pieces communicating to each other, so unit testing will never be fully reliable.
Sure. Yeah, so yeah, definitely looked at, I haven't really, so some of those things are kind of custom views. So there's definitely things with the, things with images in and all the kind of complex messages are a kind of custom view that can deal with any kind of component that's in it or combination of those. I've definitely looked at doing more component-based stuff, but I think because of the shared state of them all, it actually isn't as useful as I would like. There's quite a few times I've looked at that and thought, really should go for a much more componentized structure. But because of a lot of the shared logic and the way that the messages are loaded and everything, there's actually quite a lot of complications that still make that really difficult. There's definitely some advantages to that, and some of the stuff has gone a bit in that direction. But there's definitely the shared state is a real difficulty with that.
I have a question, Ryan.
Sure.
So, as you said, each of these has pros and cons, and we actually found that problem with the chat screen. How can we deal with it? Did you attempt to go like another architectural route before you decided to do multiple presenters? And if so, what made you go to what you ended up with?
Yeah, so I looked at some. One of the reasons that didn't go for a completely different architecture is that, well, aside from the huge amounts of code that would need changing for it, is that you then have something that's very different for the chat screen and for everything else. This is just kind of evolution of the same architecture that we've got elsewhere, which definitely gives it that advantage, so that you kind of have more shared knowledge. Also, you're using the same code, you're using those kind of later layers of use cases and things in the same way, whereas a different architecture, so you went for a more MVI architecture, you might use those in a slightly different way, maybe not. But that's definitely something I considered. It's evolved slightly into a Redux style. It's not gone as far as that yet, but that shared state, chat state, I'm looking at changing the, when you update the state, doing it in a more managed way, like a Redux style architecture, if anybody's used React or something like that. So I think it will probably evolve a little bit more in that direction to manage the changing of state, which is I think the main problem with what we have at the moment. Hasn't really caused any problems yet, fairly small team, but if the team gets a lot bigger, then we need to manage that a bit more carefully to make sure that we don't have a lot of just random global state being changed by different presenters, which could be a problem with what we have right now.
Cool. Another question. So our community is quite prone to acting a bit like a puppy, like, oh my god, MVP, oh my god, MVP,
Yeah.
oh my god, MVP, like, or we really like the shiny thing.
Yeah.
So in a large code base that exists over a fairly long period of time, you will eventually have sort of eventual segmentation from it. So it's done MVC, we've now moved on to MVP, oh my god, MVP is amazing. Like, your code base will eventually be quite fragmented, right? So you'll have like the dark and sort of scary corner that's MVC, like one engineer knows how to use it,
Yeah,
it's got for life. So I guess how do you manage that? So how do you manage, like, over time, having like a really fragmented code base? Because these, like, an architecture choice is fantastic at the time, no matter what you choose, as long as it's right fit for purpose. But over a long period of time, with the original team leaves, you get a fresh new team, and what you want says just now, and like, this is a fairly tricky question. I like, struggle with it quite a lot. But how do you ensure in a code base which might have several layers of different architecture, how do you like maintain sort of conformity in that?
Well, I think you should be like very wary of completely changing your architecture. Sometimes you have to. You've started with something that was terrible, or it's been so long that it really has changed. But I think you really need to be careful of avoiding that, like, oh, this is this shiny new thing. Test it out in a side project or a new app, and really make sure you know why this is going to be better for you and why it's going to make a big change. Because a lot of the time, you're going to spend a lot of time changing things, and it might be a little bit better, but have you really made a big enough difference that it's getting past all those problems of having a fragmented code base, or the amount of time that you've spent / possibly wasted, depending on how much benefit you've ended up getting once you go back to that horse thing, then it looks great on paper, but once you've got all of the kind of tricky bits of your code in it, is it actually that much better at the time? Obviously, if you've got no architecture, then putting something in is great, but I think a lot of times, is there a real difference between MVP and MVVM? They're different, but will they give you, if you change from one to the other, would it really change how you code and how the app performs, which is the most important thing, and how much stuff you get done? I don't think it really will. So you need to be really careful about making that change, and try not to make that change. You don't want to make that change many times, certainly, maybe once. But save it for another app or a side project. Make sure you really know this is going to be a huge benefit. Anything else? So should we go on to the next talk?
Cool, thanks, Ryan.
Cool. Thanks.